They're quick. They're undead. It's cowboys and zombies. I know what you're thinking. You're like, no, it's Cowboys and Aliens. I've seen that movie. It's Daniel Craig. I'm not talking about that one. Harrison Ford's not in the equation here. Neither is Daniel Craig, unfortunately. I would love Daniel Craig to be all up in this. He's handsome. In like the rugged, real world way, you know? I loved him as Bond. So good. But that reminds me that now I'm talking about not that. This is Quick and the Undead. This is one of the earliest games from Inside Up Games. This is the publisher. They brought you Block and Key. They brought you Earth. They brought you Gorus Maximus. They've got a lot of titles out there. This is Quick and the Undead by Daryl. Daryl's such a nice person. I really do enjoy Daryl quite a bit. This is Daryl Andrews, and who is his co-designer? Adrian Adamescu. Adrian Adamescu and Daryl Andrews. And together, this is a 1 to 6 player game, 30 to 60 minutes. It took us closer to 60 minutes. Probably, honestly, longer than 60 minutes. But to be fair, because this is language independent, it means that you need to be familiar with a lot of iconography whenever you're playing this game. And once you like know the game, it actually helps speed up play because you know what the symbols mean. But when you're teaching the game, you have to teach iconography, and sometimes that can be difficult for people to latch onto if they don't have the kind of anchor text that helps to explain that stuff. So I think your first game is going to be longer when you're teaching most people that you play with, but once you kind of get around that and you grasp what the iconography is, you can move pretty quickly through understanding what all of this stuff does. This is a game in which the town has been overrun by zombies, by the undead, and they are a threat, but you also have these competing groups of bandits. Each player has their own outlaw crew that they are fighting with, and your goal is to have the most renown by the end of the game. The way that you get that notoriety, notoriety is the term, not renown, but victory points, renown, notoriety, all of those things are synonymous with each other. You want the most by the end of the game. So in this, you have undead that are plaguing the town, which you need to be able to hit them, and they all have weak points that you need to hit. And then in addition to that, you also have your other players that you can go into duels with. So this is the player board that's going to have town locations, and those buildings give abilities, and they also house undead that may be there. And this is kind of the main street of town that will frequently have an undead in there as well. And all of these are the different locations. There are 7 of them, 8 really over here, but 7 of them match up with the number of dice. Every player has an 8-sided dice, and 2 through 8 signify the locations that you choose to go to. Everybody hides where they're going and reveals it at the same time, and then you place where you're at. And then if you choose not to, the 1 is a wild and can go to any of these locations. But then also on the flip side here, this location is how you hire new people, because your crew might die if they get shot. Anytime you're at locations with other players, or even if you just choose to attack other players, you go into what is known as duels, or if you're in buildings, they're shootouts. And these duels and these shootouts are how you might lose some of your workers that you place at locations, and also how some more undead might populate. And that is done with that 8-sided die. And every player has cards that match up with, let me see if I've got them here. There we go. So these are kind of the player mats here. These player mats are the main ways in which you signify how many bullets you have left and what dice number they relate to. Because whenever you get into a duel or a shootout, or whenever you're attacking an undead that might have a certain weakness number of maybe 3, 6, and 7, you roll the dice. And if you have bullets on those locations that you roll, you get a hit. Otherwise, you get a miss. And your hits allow you to take out zombies, and those undead have notoriety victory points that you are able to keep permanently. And then if you hit other players, you get notoriety if you're able to hit them. You can have critical misses, you can have critical hits. But this is kind of your key thing that you're always trying to make sure you have as many bullets as you can to where you can effectively hit. Because every time you shoot, if you miss, you waste a bullet and you also don't get to hurt your opponent. So it is this interesting push and pull tug of war kind of game in which you're trying to balance interference with other players when you want to hit and attack them, and then also you're trying to coordinate what buildings you might want to purchase for their round effects and which buildings you might want to clear out of the undead, because those undead have certain victory point or notoriety values to them. So it's a combination of notoriety that you gain from killing undead, notoriety that you gain from the conflict that you have over the course of the game with other players, notoriety that you gain from buildings that you might own either throughout the game or at the end of the game, and then also just locations that you go to that can give you notoriety. Each location has a different ability to maybe gain coins, which help you buy buildings, gain notoriety, which is points at the end of the game, attack the undead, go after other players through intimidation, making them give up some of their resources. Because you have three main resources. You have your bullets, which are the way that you go into combat. You have your money, which is how you buy buildings. And you have your notoriety, which is points at the end of the game. And so the ebb and flow, the loss and gain of those resources over the course of the play is really what will determine what people you want to go after. If someone's got a lot of undead that they've killed, then you can't ever do anything about those trophies. They've claimed those kills and they're going to have them the whole game. But if they have loose notoriety, maybe you want to intimidate them to reduce the amount of points that they'll have to where they're less of a contender at the end or less of a threat if they're already kind of ahead of everyone. And maybe somebody has a stranglehold on several buildings. So you've got two options. You can try to reduce the amount of coins that they have to where they can't accrue any more property that give them effects at the beginning or throughout rounds. Or maybe you want to go in and have shootouts and compete for those buildings, because as someone owns a building, the price to purchase it is cut in half for other people to encourage them to pay less to go and try to take those buildings from them. So there's a lot of conflict amongst players, and then also a lot of competition to see who can take out certain undead. And in the midst of all of that is this desire to keep a hold of the bullets that you have to make sure that you can stay competitive in killing undead and threatening other players, but also remain defensive, because if you have a lot of bullets on your player board on almost all the locations, you have a much better chance of getting a hit when you roll the dice, which makes you more of a threat or more of a scary option to other players. Maybe they don't want to go after you if the likelihood of you hitting them and killing them is high if they do so. It's a really interesting game. I like a lot of what's going on here. Now that I've played once, teaching it again will be a lot easier, and going through an explanation of the iconography will be smoother the more that I play it. But it was definitely a fun one. I got my butt kicked. I was kind of like in the middle of the competition. I didn't have near enough points to compete for first or second place. But it was fun to kind of see people's different strategies. One person was much more focused on killing undead and not really worrying about the rest of what was going on in the city. And she was one of the two people who nearly won the game. And then the other player kind of had a combination of focusing on buildings, focusing on the undead, and trying to navigate the politics of dealing with other players. So there were several different strategies. Mine definitely didn't work, but it was fun to see how those played out and check it out. I think if the same group played it again, we would get down into that 45 to 60 minute time period that this is supposed to play. I don't think you would get a shorter time period unless you just had 2 or 3 players. We were playing with 5 players, and that felt like a full experience. 6 probably would have been too much for my preferences. I think 4 or 5 is probably the sweet spot for this in terms of the amount of competition that's going on, the amount of players that can balance out the aggression of who needs to, bring the leader back down to the rest of the mob, and what outlaws need a break and we don't need to go after them because they're having a hard time as it is. So it's unique. It's interesting. The visuals are very grabbing, and the kind of language independent experience makes it to where you could bring this to a lot of different people and teach it to a bunch of different people, even if they're not, English native or anything like that. So I think that is. It's got its pros and cons when you do language independent, because it makes it to where you really do have to get the iconography across to people, and you don't have the benefit of reference cards or card text that is going to give you that explanation of what's going on. But outside of that, you can teach it to a wide variety of people, because it's not maybe in English or anything like that. So you can really get it across to a lot broader spectrum of players. This is Quick and the Undead from Inside Up Games, designed by Daryl Andrews and Adrian Adamescu. So I hope that you guys are having a good one. If you've got any interests in this, you have any questions, let me know. I was intrigued by my first play. It's got solo options. I did not explore that at all. But I hope you have a good one. And I'm going to call it. So, take a break, Devin. Take a break.